Alpha King Theron pressed his ear against the cold stone wall of the servants' corridor, his wolf snarling at what he was hearing. His beloved Queen Cassia's voice, cold as winter frost. "Let the children die. Omega blood is worthless anyway." His heart stopped. The words couldn't be real. Not from her mouth. Not from the woman who had stood beside him for 8 years, her hand in his, promising to serve their people with compassion and strength. Theron's fingers dug into the rough stone. His wolf clawed at his insides, demanding he burst through that door and rip out the throat of whoever dared speak such poison. But the voice was unmistakable. Cassia, his queen, his chosen mate. The Harvest Moon Festival had turned the palace into something alive with celebration. Banners hung from every window, and the scent of roasted meat and honey cakes drifted through the halls. For 3 days, the Shadowpine Pack had been drunk on joy, honoring the season's bounty and the strength of their Alpha King. Theron should have been in the Great Hall right now, raising his cup to the gathered Alphas and Betas, accepting their tribute. Instead, his wolf had driven him here, pacing and growling since dawn, pushing him toward the East Wing where no Alpha had business going. The Omega Quarters. The forgotten corner of his own palace. He'd tried to ignore it. He'd told himself his wolf was just restless from the crowds and ceremony. But the pull had been relentless, dragging him down corridors he hadn't walked in years, past servants who dropped into hasty bows, confusion written on their faces. And now he knew why. Through the crack in the doorframe, he could see shadows moving. Cassia stood near the window, her profile sharp and lovely in the afternoon light. She wore silver today, her dark hair coiled at her neck like a crown. Beautiful, poisonous. "Your Majesty, the healer grows difficult." That was Lydia, Cassia's beta advisor. Her voice had the efficient bite of someone used to cleaning up messes. "She keeps asking why the medicine shipments have stopped." "Then stop her asking." Cassia's tone was bored. She examined her nails, each one filed to a perfect point. "I don't care how you do it." Theron's claws extended, cutting into his palms. Blood dripped onto the stone floor. "The children are getting worse," Lydia pressed. 3 more fell ill last night. If we don't, good." Cassia turned from the window, and Theron caught the full force of her expression. No warmth, no mercy, just calculated indifference. "Let nature take its course. Omega blood is worthless anyway. They're breeding stock at best, and we already have more than we need." The words hit him like silver bullets. Each one burned. For 8 years he'd believed in her. When he'd chosen Cassia as his queen, she'd spoken so passionately about unity and justice. She'd promised to be a voice for those without power. The Omegas had wept with joy when she'd taken her vows, believing finally someone in power saw them as people, not property. It had all been a lie, a performance. She'd studied him, learned what he wanted to hear, and played the role perfectly, and he'd been too blind to see it. "But my queen," Lydia said carefully, "if word gets out that we deliberately withheld medicine, it won't get out." Cassia moved to pour herself wine from a crystal decanter. "We'll say it was a supply issue, a delay from the Healers Guild. These things happen." She sipped, thoughtful. "Besides, who would believe an Omega over their queen?" Theron's wolf howled inside him. His mate, no, not his mate, never his mate, was murdering children, his people. The most vulnerable members of his pack were dying in their beds while she drank wine and planned cover stories. He wanted to kill her. The urge was so strong his vision went red at the edges. He could do it. Shift right here, burst through that door, and end her before she drew another breath. But something held him frozen. Perhaps the part of him that had loved her, or thought he had. Perhaps the part that still couldn't believe this was real. "Your Majesty." A new voice, sharp with emotion. Female. "I need to speak with you." Theron shifted position slightly, catching a glimpse of the newcomer. Small, dark-haired, wearing the simple brown dress of a healer. An Omega by her scent. She trembled with either rage or fear, probably both, but she'd planted her feet like she had no intention of backing down. "Vera," Cassia's voice could have frozen fire. "I don't recall summoning you." "No." The Omega, Vera, lifted her chin. "You've been ignoring my summons for 2 weeks, while children die." The temperature in the room dropped. "Watch your tongue, Omega," Lydia warned. "You're speaking to your queen." "I'm speaking to a murderer." Vera's voice shook, but she didn't retreat. "I know what you've done. I know you've been blocking the medicine shipments. I know you ordered the Healers Guild to redirect supplies to other packs. I know you've been slowly killing the children in the orphanage." Cassia went very still. When she spoke, her voice was silk over steel. "That's quite an accusation. Do you have proof?" "I have the order forms, signed with your seal." For a moment nobody moved. Then Cassia smiled. It was the smile Theron had seen her use on enemies before, right before she destroyed them. "How resourceful," she said softly, "but also very stupid. Lydia, take those documents. Burn them." "No." Vera started to back toward the door, but Lydia was faster. The Beta crossed the room in 3 strides and grabbed the Omega by the throat, slamming her against the wall. Theron's muscles coiled. He forced himself to stay still. Every instinct screamed at him to intervene, but if he revealed himself now, Cassia would know he'd heard everything. She'd destroy evidence, silence witnesses, spin a story that made him look unstable or misled. She'd had 8 years to build her power base in this court. Half the Betas answered to her before they answered to him. He needed proof. He needed allies. He needed to be smart, not just strong. "Here's what's going to happen," Cassia said, moving closer to where Lydia held Vera pinned. "You're going to cooperate with the cover-up. You're going to tell anyone who asks that the children died of natural causes. Fever, weakness, the usual Omega fragility. You're going to stop asking questions and stop making trouble." "And if I don't?" Vera gasped out. Cassia leaned in until their faces were inches apart. "Then you'll join the children in their graves, and I'll make sure it's slow. Silver poisoning, I think. Painful, but it looks like natural illness to anyone who doesn't know what they're seeing." She paused. "I wonder how many of your little Omega friends would survive the same treatment. Should we find out?" Vera's eyes went wide with terror, but also something else. Recognition. She knew she was beaten, at least for now. "I thought so." Cassia stepped back, smoothing her dress. "Lydia, take the documents. Vera, you're dismissed. Remember, 1 word of this to anyone, and I start killing everyone you love." Theron moved silently back down the corridor, his wolf a raging inferno inside his chest. His hands shook, his vision blurred. Everything he'd built, everything he'd believed about his reign, his queen, his pack, it was all rotting from the inside. 8 years. She'd been doing this for 8 years, right under his nose. How many had died? How many children had gasped their last breaths in dark rooms, calling for help that never came, while he'd sat in the great hall accepting praise for his just and noble rule? He made it to his private chambers and locked the door. For a long moment he just stood there, breathing hard, fighting the shift that wanted to tear through him. Then he moved to his desk and pulled out parchment. He needed to think. He needed a plan. If he confronted Cassia directly, she'd cry manipulation. She'd say he'd been enchanted, compromised, driven mad. She had too many allies, too many Betas who benefited from her reign of terror. They'd close ranks around her, and he'd lose everything, including the chance to save the Omegas she'd targeted. No. He needed proof that couldn't be denied. He needed witnesses who couldn't be silenced. He needed to expose her slowly, carefully, building a case that even her most loyal supporters couldn't ignore. And he needed to find that Omega healer. Vera. She had documents, or at least she'd had them. If they still existed, they were evidence. And if Cassia was threatening her, she might be desperate enough to trust an Alpha King who claimed he wanted to help. If she didn't die first. Theron's claws scraped across the desk, leaving deep gouges in the wood. His wolf snarled, demanding blood and vengeance. Soon, he promised it. Soon. But first, he had to be clever. He had to be patient. He had to save his people from the monster wearing a crown. Wanting to see what would happen next, subscribe to this channel to get to listen to more of our upcoming exciting stories. Click on the subscribe button now. Thank you. Chapter 2. Theron spent 3 days learning everything he could about Vera Ashwood. It wasn't easy. The Omega existed in palace records like a ghost. Brief mentions in supply requisitions, a single line in the healer's registry from 3 years ago, nothing more. No family history, no commendations, no disciplinary actions. She'd arrived at the palace gates one winter morning with a letter of recommendation from a rural healer and had been absorbed into the Omega wing like water into sand. Invisible. That was by design, Theron realized. The upper ranks didn't see Omegas unless they needed something. A cleaned room, a pressed uniform, a warm body in their bed. Otherwise, the Omegas moved through the palace like shadows, doing the work that kept everything running while receiving none of the credit. He'd never thought about it before, never questioned why he knew the names of every Beta and Alpha in his service, but couldn't name a single Omega chambermaid. The realization sat in his stomach like a stone. His queen had built her cruelty on a foundation he'd helped create through indifference. On the morning of the 4th day, Theron rubbed wolfsbane oil into his skin until his scent disappeared beneath the sharp, bitter herb. It burned, but not as much as his shame. Then he dressed in the plain clothes of a palace inspector, a position that existed but was rarely filled, and made his way to the Omega wing. The contrast to the main palace was immediate and stark. Where the Alpha quarters gleamed with marble and gold, the Omega wing had bare stone floors worn smooth by generations of feet. The walls needed paint. The windows were small, letting in only thin streams of morning light. The air smelled of lye soap and old wood and something else. Desperation, maybe. Or resignation. Theron's wolf growled low in his chest. This was his palace, his kingdom, and he'd let it rot from the inside while he'd celebrated in rooms that sparkled. He found the healing ward at the end of a narrow corridor. The door stood open, revealing a long room lined with small cots. Most were occupied. Children, all of them. Some slept fitfully, their small faces flushed with fever. Others stared at the ceiling with glassy eyes, too weak to do more than breathe. And moving between them, a constant presence of calm efficiency, was Vera. She looked different than she had when facing down Cassia. Smaller somehow, as if confronting the queen had cost her something vital. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical braid, and her brown dress had been rolled up at the sleeves. She carried a basin of water, stopping at each cot to press cool cloths to burning foreheads, murmuring words of comfort too quiet for him to hear. Theron watched from the doorway. His wolf had gone completely still, focused on her with an intensity that felt dangerous. There was something about the way she moved, graceful despite her exhaustion, gentle despite her obvious anger at the world. She touched each child like they mattered, like they were worth saving. How many nights had she spent here? How many children had she held while they died? Knowing she could have saved them if only someone had cared enough to send medicine. "Can I help you?" Vera's voice was flat, professional. She'd noticed him finally, standing in the doorway like a creep. She set down her basin and wiped her hands on her apron, her expression carefully neutral. The expression of someone who'd learned not to show too much emotion around strangers. Theron stepped into the room, keeping his movements casual. "I'm conducting facility inspections, making sure everything meets palace standards." Something flickered in her eyes. Disbelief, maybe, or bitter amusement. Palace standards. Right. She turned back to the nearest child, adjusting his blanket with careful hands. "Well, feel free to inspect. As you can see, we're fully stocked and properly staffed." The sarcasm was barely veiled. Theron looked around the room, really looked, and felt his wolf snarl. There were maybe a dozen cots. Half of them had thin blankets that had been patched multiple times. A single cabinet held medical supplies, mostly empty shelves. A small fireplace struggled to heat the space, and several children shivered despite their fevers. "How many patients do you have?" he asked, keeping his voice level. 16 right now. We're using the floor for the overflow." Vera gestured to the far corner where several pallets had been laid out, each holding a small, motionless form. "Before you ask, yes, I'm the only healer on duty. The others were reassigned to the main palace last month. Apparently, beta warriors with training injuries are a higher priority than dying children." Theron's claws extended involuntarily. He forced them back, forced his voice to stay calm. "What are they sick with?" "Fever, treatable with the right medicine." Vera moved to check on a little girl who couldn't have been more than 5. The child's breathing was shallow, labored. Without it, their lungs fill with fluid. They drown slowly. Takes about 2 weeks from first symptoms to death. The clinical description didn't match the rage Theron could see simmering beneath her controlled exterior. She was trying to stay professional, trying not to show weakness to a stranger who might report her for insubordination. "And you don't have the medicine?" Vera's hand stilled on the child's blanket. When she looked up at him, her eyes were hard as stone. "No, someone keeps diverting our supplies. The orders go through, the shipments get redirected. We're told it's a supply chain issue, a delay. That more is coming." She stood, facing him fully now. 12 children have died in 6 months from a completely treatable illness. So no, Inspector, we don't meet palace standards. We fall catastrophically short. The boldness of it struck him. She had no idea who he was. The wolfsbane masked his alpha presence completely. But she was willing to tell this stranger the truth anyway. Willing to risk punishment or worse because these children deserved someone to speak for them. His wolf had been right to push him here. "That's a serious accusation," Theron said carefully. "It's a serious crime." Vera's voice shook slightly, the first crack in her composure. "Children are dying. Someone is letting them die. And everyone just accepts it. Because they're omegas. Because their lives don't matter as much as beta comfort or alpha convenience." She was magnificent in her fury. Terrified. He could smell the fear on her beneath the herbs she'd used to scrub her skin, but unwilling to be silent. Cassia had threatened her with silver poisoning and a slow death, and here she was, still fighting. "Why do you stay?" Theron asked. The question came out rougher than he'd intended. "If it's this dangerous, this hopeless, why not leave?" Vera's expression crumbled. Just for a moment the warrior healer vanished, and he saw the exhausted, heartbroken woman underneath. She turned away, moving to the pallet in the far corner. A boy lay there, maybe 8 years old, his breathing wet and rattling. His skin had the gray tinge of someone losing the fight. "This is Finn," Vera said quietly, kneeling beside the boy and brushing hair back from his forehead. "He's my brother, the only family I have left." Her voice caught. "Our parents died when I was 16. I've been taking care of him ever since. He's all I have, and I'm all he has." The boy's eyes fluttered open briefly. He tried to smile at his sister, but the effort cost him. His breath came in short, painful gasps. Theron felt something crack open in his chest. This was why she'd confronted Cassia. Why she'd risked everything. Not for justice or principle, though those mattered to her. But for this. For a small boy who was drowning on dry land while the people who could save him chose not to. "I've been keeping records," Vera said suddenly. She glanced at Theron, assessing him with sharp eyes. "I knew no one would believe an Omega's word alone. So I documented everything. Dates, names of children who died, missing supply orders, the medicine that was promised and never arrived." She paused. "It's hidden, not here, somewhere safe." Theron's heart kicked against his ribs. "That's dangerous. If someone found out, they'll kill me anyway." Vera's voice was flat, accepting. "At least this way, maybe someone will see the truth eventually. Maybe it'll matter." She didn't believe it, though. He could hear the hopelessness underneath her defiance. She'd kept the records because it was the only thing she could do, not because she truly thought they'd change anything. He wanted to tell her. Wanted to drop the disguise and reveal himself as the Alpha King, promise her that he'd make this right, that he'd burn down anyone who'd hurt these children. But the timing was wrong. If Cassia suspected he knew the truth, she'd move faster, cover her tracks more completely. Vera's evidence could disappear. More children could die. He had to be patient. He had to be smart. But God, it was hard. "The records are in the garden," Vera continued, her voice barely above a whisper. She wasn't looking at him now, focused on her brother. "The southeast corner, near the old stone fountain that doesn't work anymore. There's a loose stone in the foundation. Third from the left on the bottom row." She finally met his eyes. "If something happens to me, someone should know where they are." "Why are you telling me this?" Theron asked. "You don't know me. I could be working for whoever's doing this." "Could be." Vera shrugged, the gesture weary beyond her years. "But I have to trust someone. And you're the first person in months who's actually listened, who's actually looked at these children like they're real." She swallowed hard. "If you are working for them, then at least it'll be over soon. I'm tired of being afraid." Theron's wolf surged forward, demanding he protect her, claim her, tell her she'd never have to be afraid again. The intensity of the feeling shocked him. He barely knew this woman. But something about her called to something in him, something primal and absolute that had nothing to do with choice or reason. His queen had never sparked this in him. 8 years, and Cassia had never made his wolf rise with such certainty. Before he could respond, footsteps echoed in the corridor. Sharp, precise footsteps that he'd recognize anywhere. Cassia. Vera heard them too. Her face went pale. But she stood and moved away from her brother, putting distance between her grief and the woman who was causing it. By the time the queen appeared in the doorway, Vera's expression was carefully blank. "Your Majesty." Vera bowed, the gesture mechanical. Cassia's eyes swept the room, taking in the dying children, the empty supply cabinet, Theron in his inspector's disguise. Her gaze lingered on him for a moment too long, suspicion glinting in those cold eyes. "I wasn't aware we were conducting facility inspections," she said coolly. Theron bowed, keeping his posture submissive, the posture of someone who knew their place below a queen. "Routine maintenance review, Your Majesty, making sure the Omega Wing is adequately maintained." "How thorough?" Cassia's smile was ice. "And what have you found?" "Some deficiencies in supplies," Theron said carefully, "but nothing that can't be addressed through proper channels." "Excellent." Cassia turned her attention to Vera, and Theron saw the Omega stiffen. "Vera, I need to speak with you. Come to my chambers tonight, after the dinner bell." It wasn't a request. It was a command wrapped in silk, and they all knew it. Vera's hands clenched into fists at her sides, but her voice stayed steady. "Of course, Your Majesty. Don't be late." Cassia's eyes glittered with something dark. "We have much to discuss. Your reassignment, for instance." The word landed like a blade. Reassignment. That could mean anything. Transfer to another pack, exile, imprisonment. Or it could mean something worse, something permanent. Theron's wolf lunged against his control, demanding he shift and tear Cassia apart right here. He locked every muscle, forced himself to stay still, to stay silent. If he revealed himself now, Vera would be killed before morning. He had to trust she could survive one more night. But God, the look in her eyes. She knew exactly what that summons meant. "Yes, Your Majesty," Vera said quietly. Cassia swept from the room, her silver dress whispering against the stone floor. The moment she disappeared, the tension broke. Vera's knees buckled and she caught herself on the nearest cot, breathing hard. "I have to go," Theron said, his voice rough. "But don't." Vera straightened, forcing steel back into her spine. "Don't make promises, don't tell me it'll be okay, just If you're really conducting an inspection, put in your report that children are dying here. That's all I need." She thought he was powerless. Some low-level inspector who might file a complaint that would be ignored by the people above him. She didn't know she was talking to the one person who could actually change everything. Theron wanted to tell her, wanted to rip off the disguise and promise her the world. But the timing was still wrong, and Cassia's suspicions were already raised. "I'll do what I can," he said instead. Vera nodded, not believing him. She'd stopped believing in rescue a long time ago. Theron left the healing ward, his mind racing. Tonight. Cassia had summoned Vera for tonight. That gave him hours, not days. He had to move fast. First, he'd retrieve the records from the garden. Then he'd gather his most trusted betas, the ones who'd served him before Cassia, who might still put their king above their queen. He'd need witnesses when he confronted Cassia, people who couldn't be bought or intimidated. And tonight, before Vera walked into that death trap, he'd be there. Ready. His queen thought she was untouchable, thought 8 years of manipulation had made her invincible. She was about to learn how wrong she was. Behind him, in the healing ward, Vera knelt beside her brother's pallet and held his small hand. She sang to him, her voice cracking on the lullaby their mother used to sing. Theron heard it echo down the corridor as he walked away, and it sounded like a funeral dirge. If you're still listening to this story up to this point, why don't you subscribe to this channel to continue getting impactful daily stories like this? We would be most grateful if you can do that to help boost this video to reach everyone. Thank you. Chapter 3. Theron followed his queen like a ghost. It wasn't difficult. After 8 years of marriage, Cassia had grown comfortable, careless. She didn't look over her shoulder anymore, didn't check for listening ears or watching eyes. She moved through the palace like she owned it, which Theron was beginning to understand. She believed she did. He'd armed himself with more wolfsbane oil, masking his scent so thoroughly that even his own betas wouldn't recognize him. The burn had settled into a constant, throbbing ache across his skin, but he barely noticed. His focus was absolute. Cassia started her day in the throne room, holding court with the grace of someone born to power. She listened to petitions from pack members, her expression sympathetic, her judgments fair and measured. The betas adored her. The alphas respected her. She laughed at the right moments, showed concern when appropriate, touched arms and shoulders with practiced warmth. It was a flawless performance. Theron watched from the gallery above, hidden in shadows, and saw every false note. The way her smile never reached her eyes. The calculated pause before each response, as if she was running through a script in her head. The subtle way she dismissed Omega petitioners quickly, barely listening before sending them away with vague promises. He'd never noticed before, never thought to look beneath the surface of her elegance. God, he'd been blind. After court, Cassia retreated to her private study. Theron waited 5 minutes, then slipped through a servant's entrance that led to a narrow passage behind the walls. The palace was honeycombed with these passages, built generations ago so that servants could move unseen, but most people had forgotten they existed. Theron hadn't. He'd explored every inch of this palace as a boy. He found a gap in the wood paneling that gave him a view into Cassia's study. She sat at her desk, writing letters with swift, sharp strokes. When she finished, she sealed each one with her personal sigil. Not the queen's seal, but her family's crest from before she'd married him. That was odd. Official correspondence should use the queen's seal. A knock at the door made Cassia look up. "Enter." Lydia came in, her face tight with tension. "Your Majesty, he's here." "Good, send him through the garden entrance. I don't want anyone seeing him come through the main doors." "He?" Theron's wolf went on alert. Cassia wasn't scheduled to meet with anyone this afternoon. Lydia left, and Cassia stood, smoothing her dress. She moved to the window, staring out at the gardens with an expression Theron had never seen on her face before. Hunger. Anticipation. Something almost feral. 10 minutes later, Another knock. This time, Cassia opened the door herself. The man who entered made Theron's claws extend involuntarily. Alpha Dominic of the Bloodfang Pack. Tall, scarred, with eyes like chips of amber ice. Bloodfang was Shadowpine's oldest rival. They'd fought border skirmishes for generations, an endless dance of territory and pride. What the hell was he doing in Cassia's private study? Dominic. Cassia's voice was warm in a way it never was with Theron. It's been too long. 3 weeks. Dominic moved closer to her, familiar in a way that made Theron's vision go red. Your letters said it was urgent. The timeline has moved up. Cassia gestured for him to sit, pouring 2 glasses of wine. Theron's wolf has been restless lately. If he starts paying attention to the wrong parts of the palace, then we accelerate. Dominic accepted the wine, studying her over the rim. How many are left? In the orphanage? Maybe 20. The weak ones will be gone within the month. The stronger ones will take longer. Cassia sipped her wine, thoughtful. The adult Omegas are more problematic. There are still hundreds of them scattered throughout the pack. Theron's blood turned to ice. They were talking about genocide. Not just the children in the healing ward, but every Omega in Shadowpine. My contact in the Healers Guild can manage the supply diversions for another 6 months, Dominic said. After that, questions will be asked. 6 months is enough. Cassia leaned forward, her eyes bright with terrible excitement. Once the Omega bloodline is sufficiently weakened, Shadowpine will be ready. A pack of alphas and betas only, strong, unified, unstoppable. No more dead weight. No more resources wasted on creatures who contribute nothing. And when Theron discovers what you've done? Cassia's smile was cold and sharp as a blade. He won't. He's too comfortable, too trusting. He sees what I want him to see. She paused, swirling her wine. And even if he did find out, who would believe him over me? I've spent 8 years building my reputation. The pack loves me. The elders trust me. I'm the compassionate queen. Remember? The voice for the voiceless. She laughed, and the sound made Theron's wolf snarl with rage. Besides, Cassia continued, I have contingency plans. If Theron becomes difficult, there are ways to handle that. A king who's gone mad with alpha fever, who's become paranoid and violent. It's not unheard of. Tragic, but necessary for the good of the pack. She was planning to kill him, or at least depose him, paint him as insane, take his throne. How long had she been planning this? Years? Had their entire marriage been a setup for this moment? When it's done, Dominic said quietly, the agreement stands. Bloodfang and Shadowpine unite? As co-rulers. Cassia touched his hand, the gesture intimate. Equals, the strongest pack alliance in the region. Theron had heard enough. He pulled back from the gap in the wall, his heart hammering against his ribs. This wasn't just about cruelty or prejudice. This was about power. Cassia and Dominic were using the Omega genocide to weaken Shadowpine from within, making it vulnerable to a Bloodfang takeover disguised as an alliance. And she'd almost succeeded. Theron forced his breathing to steady, his mind to clear. He needed those records. Vera's documentation. Without proof, this was just his word against Cassia's. And she was right. The pack would believe her. He left the palace through a servant's exit and headed for the gardens. The southeast corner was overgrown, wild. The old stone fountain stood like a forgotten monument, its basin cracked and dry. Theron knelt at its base, counting stones. 3rd from the left on the bottom row. The stone came loose easily, as if it had been removed and replaced many times. Behind it, a hollow space. And inside that space, a leather satchel wrapped in oilcloth. Theron pulled it out with shaking hands and opened it. Papers. Dozens of them. Vera's handwriting covered every sheet in neat, precise rows. Dates, names, ages, causes of death, supply orders that had been approved, then mysteriously redirected. Letters from the Healers Guild explaining delays that shouldn't have existed. And a list. God, the list. 47 names. 47 Omega children dead in 2 years. Not 12. 47. Theron's vision blurred. He'd thought he understood the scope of Cassia's crime, but this was systematic extermination. Dozens of children, their lives snuffed out before they could grow into adults. Future healers, caretakers, the heart of the pack's social fabric. Gone. And beneath the children's list, another one. Adult Omegas who died in the past 2 years. The official causes varied. Illness, accidents, natural causes. But Vera had noted patterns. Clusters of deaths in specific regions. Timing that coincided with supply shortages. She'd been tracking a genocide, and no one had believed her because she was Omega. Because her voice didn't matter. Theron's hands clenched on the papers. His wolf was beyond rage now, in that cold, crystalline place where decisions became absolute. Cassia would answer for this. Tonight. But first, he had to save Vera. He looked up at the sky. The sun was setting, painting the clouds blood red. The dinner bell would ring soon. And after that, Vera would walk into Cassia's chambers, expecting death. Theron ran. He didn't bother with stealth anymore, didn't care who saw the Alpha King sprinting through the palace corridors like a madman. He hit Cassia's chambers at full speed, shouldering through the door hard enough to crack the wood. The scene inside froze him for a heartbeat. Vera stood in the center of the room, Lydia gripping her arm hard enough to bruise. Cassia held a small crystal vial, its contents dark and viscous. And Vera's face. God, her face was set with the kind of resigned terror that said she knew exactly what was about to happen, and had accepted it. Drink, Cassia was saying, her voice honey-sweet. It's medicine, Vera. For your brother. This will save him. Liar! Vera's voice shook. That's poison. Don't be dramatic. Cassia moved closer, the vial extended. Just one swallow, and Finn gets the treatment he needs. Refuse, and I'll make sure he dies slowly, painfully, while you watch. Vera's resolve cracked. Tears streaked down her face. You're a monster. I'm a queen. Cassia's smile was terrible. Now drink, or your brother pays the price. Vera's hand reached for the vial. Her fingers trembled. She was actually going to do it. Sacrifice herself for the slim chance that Cassia would keep her word about Finn. No! Theron's voice cracked through the room like thunder. All 3 women spun toward him. Vera's eyes went wide with recognition. The inspector from the healing ward, except now the wolfsbane had worn off enough that his alpha presence radiated from him like heat. Cassia recovered first, her expression shifting to surprised concern. Theron, what are you? He crossed the room in 3 strides and snatched the vial from her hand. The glass was warm, almost pulsing. His wolf recoiled from it immediately. Silver extract. Enough to kill an Omega within hours, the death agonizing and unstoppable. Let her go. Theron's voice was quiet, deadly. Now. Lydia released Vera immediately, stepping back. The beta's face had gone pale. She recognized the look in her king's eyes, the look that said someone was about to die. Vera stumbled forward, and Theron caught her arm, steadying her. She stared up at him, confusion and hope warring in her expression. You're, she whispered, you're the Alpha King. Yes. He kept his eyes on Cassia. And my queen has been poisoning my pack. For just a moment, Cassia's mask slipped. He saw calculation flash across her face, watched her assess the situation and pivot her strategy in real time. Then the mask snapped back into place. But different now. Vulnerable, hurt, betrayed. Theron! Her voice broke beautifully. What are you talking about? I found this Omega threatening me, claiming I'd been hurting children. She must have enchanted you somehow, made you see things that aren't real. Stop! Theron's command echoed with alpha power. I heard everything. Your meeting with Dominic, your plans to eliminate the Omegas, The alliance you're building on the graves of children. Cassia's eyes widened. You're not making sense. You sound... She turned to Lydia, fear painted across her features. He sounds mad, like alpha fever. How long has he been acting strangely? Don't. Theron took a step toward her, and Cassia retreated, her hand pressed to her throat in a gesture of frightened innocence. I have proof. Records. Documentation of everything you've done. Records from her? Cassia pointed at Vera, her voice rising. An Omega who'd say anything to drive a wedge between us? Theron, please, listen to yourself. You're claiming I'm conspiring with our enemies, murdering children. Do you hear how insane that sounds? She was good. God, she was so good at this. Her voice trembled at exactly the right moments. Her eyes filled with tears that looked genuine. She embodied the wronged wife, the faithful queen falsely accused by a mad king who'd been seduced by an Omega's lies. And the worst part? If Theron had heard this accusation leveled at any other Alpha, he might have believed it. Alpha fever was real. The madness that came when an Alpha's wolf took too much control. It manifested as paranoia, violent delusions, loss of reason. Cassia was painting him with that brush, and doing it perfectly. Theron! Vera's voice was soft beside him. She's lying. You know she's lying. Of course I'd say that, Cassia cut in, her voice hardening slightly. The Omega who's enchanted you would say that. Theron, I love you. I've stood by you for 8 years. Why would I betray you? Power, Theron said flatly. You want my throne, and you want Dominic in my place. Cassia's face crumbled. She turned away, pressing her hands to her face as if to hide tears. When she spoke, her voice was muffled, broken. I can't do this. If you truly believe these things about me, if you think I'm capable of... She straightened, and her face was set with terrible resolve. I demand a pack trial, before the Elders' Council. Let them hear the accusations. Let them judge whether I'm a murderer, or whether my husband has been compromised. The words hit Theron like ice water. A pack trial. The Elders' Council consisted of 7 of the oldest, most respected wolves in Shadowpine. They served as judges in disputes that couldn't be settled by the Alpha King alone. And their decisions were binding, even on the king. Cassia had just backed him into a corner. If he refused the trial, he looked like a tyrant afraid of justice. If he accepted, he'd be putting his accusations before a council that Cassia had been charming for 8 years. A council that had no reason to trust an Omega's word over their beloved queens. Fine, Theron heard himself say. Tomorrow at dawn, the full council, and we let the evidence speak. Cassia's eyes glittered with triumph beneath her tears. Thank you. That's all I ask, a fair hearing. She paused, letting vulnerability creep back into her voice. Until then, I'll stay in my chambers. Under guard, if you wish. To prove I have nothing to hide. She was offering to be confined like a prisoner, knowing it would make her look cooperative, innocent, knowing that by tomorrow she'd have time to work on the elders, to plant seeds of doubt about Theron's sanity. He'd walked straight into her trap, and she knew it. Lydia will stay with you, Theron said. No one else enters or leaves. Of course. Cassia moved to sit on her couch, the picture of dignified resignation. I have nothing to fear from the truth. Theron turned to leave, Vera's arm still in his grip. But at the doorway, he looked back. Cassia was watching him with an expression that made his blood run cold. Not fear, not anger. Just cold, calculating confidence. She thought she'd already won. And as Theron led Vera out into the corridor, his mind racing through scenarios and strategies, he couldn't shake the terrible feeling that she might be right. If you're still listening to this story up to this point, why don't you subscribe to this channel to continue getting impactful daily stories like this? We would be most grateful if you can do that to help boost this video to reach everyone. Thank you. Chapter 4. Dawn broke cold and gray over Shadowpine Palace. Theron stood at the window of his chambers, watching the pack gather in the great courtyard below. They came in waves, alphas and betas first, claiming the best viewing positions near the raised platform where the Elders' Council would sit. Then came the lower ranks, the workers and craftsmen, pressing close to hear. And finally, barely visible at the edges, the Omegas. They stood in clusters, silent and watchful, hope and fear written in equal measure across their faces. This was unprecedented. In 300 years of Shadowpine history, no queen had ever been publicly accused by her king. The trial had become the only thing anyone could talk about. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some said Theron had gone mad with alpha fever, others whispered that the queen was a secret traitor, still others claimed an Omega witch had enchanted the Alpha King. Everyone had an opinion. No one knew the truth. Except him, and Vera, and Cassia. "Your Majesty," the voice came from behind him. Commander Marcus, his most trusted beta, stood at attention. "The council is assembled. They're ready for you." Theron nodded, not turning from the window. "Where is Vera?" "In the south tower, under guard as you ordered. Safe." Marcus paused. "My king." "Are you certain about this?" "No." Theron finally turned to face his commander. "But I'm certain about what Cassia has done, and that has to be enough." Marcus studied him with eyes that had seen 30 years of service to the Shadowpine crown. "The Elders love her. You know that." "I know. And the Pack. They think you've been compromised. They're saying the Omega Healer seduced you, that you're not thinking clearly." "I know that too." Theron moved toward the door, his jaw set. "But those children died, Marcus. 47 of them. Someone has to speak for them, even if it costs me everything." Marcus followed him into the corridor. "For what it's worth, my king, I believe you. I've watched the Queen these past few days. The mask slipped just for a moment and I saw what was underneath." He paused. "It was monstrous." The words settled something in Theron's chest. He wasn't alone in this, not entirely. They descended to the courtyard together. The crowd parted for their Alpha King, but Theron felt the weight of their stares, judgment, suspicion. Some faces showed pity. They thought they were watching their beloved king's descent into madness. The platform had been built overnight, solid oak rising 10 feet above the courtyard. 7 chairs sat in a semicircle, the Elders' Council. Behind them, the Shadowpine banner rippled in the morning breeze, the silver wolf on black silk watching over everything with unblinking eyes. The elders were already seated. Elder Miriam, her white hair braided like a crown. Elder Thomas, scarred from 100 battles. Elder Helena, wise and calculating. And 4 others, each one a pillar of Shadowpine society, each one someone Cassia had courted and charmed for 8 years. Theron climbed the platform and took his position at the center. Moments later, guards escorted Cassia up the opposite side. She was a vision of wronged innocence. Her dress was simple white, the color of mourning in their culture, and her hair fell loose around her shoulders, unadorned. No jewelry, no crown. Just a woman stripped of pretense, facing accusations that had broken her heart. Her eyes were red from crying, her face pale with exhaustion. The crowd murmured, sympathy, outrage on her behalf. How dare anyone accuse this graceful, suffering queen? Elder Miriam stood, her voice carrying across the courtyard. "We are gathered to hear accusations brought by Alpha King Theron against Queen Cassia. These are serious charges: conspiracy, murder, treason. The accused has requested trial by council, as is her right." She paused, her ancient eyes moving between them. "Let the Alpha King speak his accusations." Theron stepped forward. His wolf prowled inside him, agitated by the artificial bond that still connected him to Cassia. Even knowing what she'd done, his instincts screamed at him to protect her, to stop this trial before it destroyed her. He spoke through the pain. "Queen Cassia has systematically murdered Omega children in our pack. She has diverted medicine and supplies, allowing 47 children to die of treatable illnesses over the past 2 years. She has done this in collaboration with Alpha Dominic of Bloodfang Pack as part of a plan to weaken Shadowpine from within and create an opening for invasion. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Cassia swayed slightly, as if the words had physically struck her. "These are..." Elder Thomas's voice was heavy with disbelief. "These are extraordinary accusations, my king. What proof do you offer?" Theron gestured, and Marcus stepped forward with Vera's leather satchel. "Records, documented by the Omega healer Vera Ashwood. Names, dates, supply orders, and evidence of systematic diversion of resources." Elder Helena accepted the satchel and began examining the contents, her expression unreadable. The other elders leaned in, studying the papers. "These are one woman's notes," Elder Miriam said finally. "An Omega's word. Where is the corroboration? Where are the witnesses?" "I am a witness." Theron's voice rang with Alpha command. "I overheard Queen Cassia planning with Alpha Dominic. I heard her admit to the murders. I heard her lay out her plan to take my throne." "When?" Cassia's voice was barely a whisper, broken with pain. "When did you hear this, Theron? Because I have been with you nearly every day for 8 years. When did I supposedly meet with our greatest enemy?" The trap snapped shut. She was forcing him to admit he'd been spying on her, following her in disguise. It would make him look paranoid, unhinged. "4 days ago," Theron said steadily, "in your private study, I was conducting my own investigation." "Spying on me," Cassia's voice cracked. "You were spying on your own wife. Because of what? Because an Omega healer whispered poison in your ear? Because children were dying." "Children die, Theron." Cassia turned to face the council, her hands clasped in front of her like a supplicant. "It's tragic, but it happens. Omegas are fragile, their children more so. We do everything we can, but sometimes..." She let tears spill down her cheeks. "Sometimes it's not enough. And rather than accept this painful truth, my husband has decided I'm a murderer. Because an Omega he barely knows told him so." The murmurs from the crowd grew louder. Agreement, sympathy for the Queen, doubt about their king. Elder Thomas leaned forward. "Your Majesty, with respect, why would you believe this Omega healer over your own mate, your bonded queen?" "Because I saw the evidence." "Because I heard what you thought you heard," Cassia interrupted softly. "Theron, my love, I think you're ill. Alpha fever can cause delusions, paranoia. It makes you see threats where none exist." She turned to the elders, desperation in her voice. "Please help him. He needs treatment, not a trial. This Omega has somehow twisted his mind." "Bring forward Vera Ashwood," Theron commanded. Guards led Vera onto the platform. She looked tiny up here, fragile in her healer's dress, her dark braid hanging over one shoulder. But when she lifted her chin and met the council's eyes, Theron saw the same fire that had made her challenge a queen. "State your name and position," Elder Miriam said. "Vera Ashwood, Omega healer, assigned to the children's ward." Her voice was steady, clear. "I've served Shadowpine for 3 years." "And you claim the Queen has been murdering children?" "Yes." Vera didn't flinch. "I have documented 47 deaths from fever that should have been easily treatable. Medicine was ordered, approved, and then diverted. The orders all bore the Queen's seal." "How convenient," one of Cassia's supporters called from the crowd. "An Omega accuses the Queen right when her position might be vulnerable." "She wants to be Queen herself," another voice shouted. "She's seduced the king." The crowd was turning hostile. Theron saw Omegas at the edges beginning to back away, fear replacing hope on their faces. Elder Helena raised her hand for silence. "Miss Ashwood, these are serious accusations. But you must understand, you're asking us to believe that our Queen, who has shown nothing but grace and compassion for 8 years, has been secretly committing genocide." She paused. That's difficult to accept based solely on your records. I know. Vera's voice was small now, the reality of her position crashing down. I know how it sounds. But it's true. The children died. They died because they were weak, Cassia said, her voice hardening slightly. As I said, tragic, but natural. No. A new voice rang across the courtyard, quavering with age but strong with conviction. Not natural, calculated. The crowd parted. An elderly Omega woman walked forward, her back bent with years but her eyes sharp as glass. She wore the deep green of a master healer, a rank so rare that Theron had only ever known one person to hold it. Margaret, he breathed. Margaret had been Shadowpine's head healer when Theron first took the throne. She'd retired 3 years ago, or so he'd been told, moved to the country for her health. He'd never questioned it. Now, seeing her march toward the platform with grim determination, he realized what a fool he'd been. Elder Council, Margaret said, climbing the steps with difficulty. I am Margaret Stonebrook, former master healer of Shadowpine. I served this pack for 50 years before Queen Cassia forced me into exile. Cassia's face went white. Just for a heartbeat, pure panic flashed across her features before she locked it down. Margaret, she said warmly, moving forward with outstretched hands. What are you doing here? You should be resting, recovering. Don't. Margaret's voice cut like a knife. Don't pretend. Not now. She turned to the council. 3 years ago, I discovered discrepancies in our medical supplies. Medicine going missing, orders being altered. I brought my concerns to the Queen, believing she would help me investigate. And I did, Cassia said smoothly. We found the issue was with the suppliers, remember? You were so upset, so exhausted from the stress. You threatened me. Margaret's voice shook with rage. You told me if I pursued it further, you'd have me declared incompetent and strip my healing license. You said I'd end my career in disgrace unless I disappeared quietly. The courtyard had gone silent. Every eye was fixed on the platform. I was weak, Margaret continued. I was afraid, so I left, but I didn't stop watching. I've been documenting everything from outside the palace walls. She pulled a thick ledger from her bag and held it up. 3 years of evidence, medicine orders, diversion records, all signed by Queen Cassia, all redirected to the same place, Bloodfang Pack. Elder Thomas took the ledger, his scarred hands careful with the pages. His expression darkened as he read. This is... He looked up at Cassia. Your Majesty, these signatures can be forged, Cassia said, but her voice had lost some of its warmth. This woman was dismissed for incompetence. She's bitter, seeking revenge. I have one more thing to show you. Margaret's voice was quiet now, deadly. The real reason Cassia wanted me gone. The secret I discovered that would have destroyed her 8 years ago if I'd understood what I was seeing. She pulled out a small glass vial, its contents shimmering with an opalescent glow. This is a bond potion, Margaret said, created by dark magic and witchcraft. When 2 wolves drink it, they feel what they believe is a fated mate bond. But it's artificial, a lie wrapped in magic. Theron's heart stopped. I found the empty vial in the Queen's chambers 8 years ago, right after the Alpha King announced she was his fated mate. I didn't understand then what it meant. But I kept it. And I've spent 3 years researching with every witch and magical expert I could find. Margaret's eyes found Theron's. Your Majesty, Queen Cassia is not your fated mate. She never was. The courtyard erupted. Shouts, gasps, denials. Elder Miriam banged her staff against the platform, demanding silence. Theron couldn't breathe. The bond inside him, the connection he'd trusted for 8 years, was a lie? His wolf howled in confusion and rage. More than that, Margaret continued, her voice cutting through the chaos. Cassia isn't even Shadowpine. She's Bloodfang, planted here 8 years ago to seduce the Alpha King and destroy the pack from within. Lies! Cassia's mask shattered completely. Her elegant facade cracked, revealing something cold and vicious underneath. You have no proof of that. I have your birth records. Margaret pulled out another document. Found in the Bloodfang archives by a friend who owed me a favor. Cassia Thornwild, born to the Bloodfang Beta family. Sent away at age 18 for education. She returned to Bloodfang briefly before appearing here, with a new name and a bond potion, to seduce our king. Cassia's laugh was harsh, brittle. And why would Bloodfang do that? What purpose? To destroy us from within. Theron found his voice finally, the pieces falling into place. Eliminate the Omegas, weaken the Pack's foundation, create chaos. Then Bloodfang moves in during the disorder. Alpha Dominic gets a throne, Margaret added, and Cassia gets to rule beside him as co-alpha, the perfect conquest. Cassia stared at them, her chest heaving. Then, slowly, she began to laugh. It was the sound of someone who had nothing left to lose. Fine, she said. Fine. You want the truth? She turned to face the crowd, her voice ringing with contempt. Yes, I'm Bloodfang. Yes, I used a bond potion. And yes, I've been killing your precious Omegas. She spat the word like a curse. Those weak, useless creatures who drain resources and contribute nothing. A pack doesn't need them. Alphas and betas, that's all. Strength and power, not sentiment and weakness. The Omegas at the edges of the crowd began to flee. Panic rippled through the courtyard. You're insane, Theron said. I'm practical. Cassia's eyes blazed. And I almost succeeded. Another 6 months and the Omega bloodline would have been decimated. Shadowpine would have been ripe for the taking. But you, she pointed at Vera with pure hatred. You and your pathetic records. You and your refusal to die quietly like you were supposed to. She shifted. The transformation happened in a heartbeat. Elegant queen becoming massive black wolf. Her fangs bared and eyes blazing with murder. She launched herself at Vera, death in every line of her body. Theron shifted and met her in midair. They crashed together with a sound like thunder. Cassia was fast, vicious, going for his throat with the precision of someone trained for assassination. But Theron was stronger, his alpha wolf massive and silver-furred, and he threw her back. The artificial bond tore at him. Every instinct screamed that he was attacking his mate, that he was committing the ultimate betrayal. Pain lanced through his chest, his head, his soul. It felt like being ripped in half. Cassia used his hesitation. She darted around him, heading for Margaret and Vera. The elderly healer stood frozen, but Vera stepped forward, placing herself between Cassia and Margaret. No! Theron lunged, but the bond pain drove him to his knees. His wolf whimpered, confused and agonized. Cassia's jaws opened wide, aiming for Vera's throat, and Vera did something impossible. She didn't run, didn't cower. Instead, she stepped toward Theron's collapsed form and pressed her hand against his chest. Light exploded from the point of contact, golden, pure, impossibly bright. It rushed through Theron like fire, burning away shadows he hadn't known existed. The artificial bond screamed and shattered, breaking into pieces that dissolved like smoke, and in its place, true recognition. His wolf surged forward, no longer confused. It knew this Omega, knew her scent, her soul, the way her heartbeat matched his own. This was real. This was right. Mate, not Cassia, never Cassia, Vera, his true fated mate. The realization gave him strength. Theron rose, the bond pain gone, replaced by crystal clear purpose. When Cassia lunged again, he was ready. He caught her mid-leap, his jaws closing on her scruff, and slammed her into the platform hard enough to crack the wood. She shifted back to human form, gasping. How? You shouldn't be able to. The bond is broken. Theron's voice was rough, his wolf still close to the surface. You have no power over me anymore. Guards swarmed the platform, silver chains in hand. They wrapped Cassia in bonds that would prevent her from shifting, from using her strength. She fought, screaming curses, but it was over. The Queen of Shadowpine was defeated. Theron shifted back to human form, his body shaking from the effort and the aftermath of the severed bond. He tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't hold him. He collapsed, his vision going dark at the edges. The last thing he saw before unconsciousness took him was Vera's face above his, her hand still pressed to his chest, tears streaming down her cheeks as golden light continued to pulse between them. "Mate," his wolf whispered as darkness claimed him. Finally, mate. If you're still listening to this story up to this point, why don't you subscribe to this channel to continue getting impactful daily stories like this? We would be most grateful if you can do that to help boost this video to reach everyone. Thank you. Chapter 5. Theron woke to golden light. For a moment he thought he was still trapped in the dream. The sensation of breaking chains, of poison burning away, of something true and right finally clicking into place. But then awareness sharpened, and he realized the light wasn't metaphorical. It pulsed between his chest and Vera's hand, which still rested above his heart. She sat beside his bed in the healing ward, her eyes closed, her face drawn with exhaustion. The golden glow ebbed and flowed with their synchronized breathing, a visible manifestation of the mate bond that had always been there, buried beneath Cassia's artificial magic. His true mate. The knowledge settled into his bones like coming home after years of wandering. His wolf was completely calm for the first time in 8 years, purring with contentment at her proximity. "Vera," he said softly. Her eyes opened immediately. Relief flooded her features, followed quickly by embarrassment. She pulled her hand back, and the golden light faded to a barely visible shimmer beneath his skin. "You're awake." Her voice was hoarse, like she'd been talking or crying for hours. "The healers said you'd recover, but the bond severance was severe. You've been unconscious for 2 days. 2 days. Theron tried to sit up and his body protested every movement. He felt hollowed out, as if someone had scooped out his insides and forgotten to replace them. "Cassia," he managed, "imprisoned. The elders convicted her of treason, conspiracy, and murder. The sentence is—" Vera swallowed hard. "Death by silver, 3 days from now." Theron should have felt something. Relief, maybe, or grief for the woman he'd thought he loved. Instead, there was only numbness and a bone-deep exhaustion. "She's been laughing," Vera continued quietly, "in her cell. The guards say she sits there and laughs like she's won some private victory." That sent ice down Theron's spine. He forced himself upright despite his body's protests. "Take me to her. You need to rest. Now." Vera helped him stand, her small frame supporting more of his weight than should have been possible. The bond hummed between them, lending him her strength. They moved through the palace like that, pressed close together, and Theron felt the stares of every beta and alpha they passed. Word had spread, clearly, about the trial, about the fake bond, about the Omega healer who was apparently the king's true mate. The dungeons were cold and dark, lit by torches that cast dancing shadows across damp stone. Cassia's cell was at the far end, separated from the common prisoners. When Theron approached, she was indeed laughing, a low, bitter sound that echoed off the walls. "There he is," she said when she saw them, "the noble Alpha King and his Omega whore. Come to gloat?" "Why are you laughing?" Theron asked flatly. "You've lost everything." "Have I?" Cassia moved to the bars, her hands wrapped around the silver-laced iron despite the way it burned her skin. "Think about it, Theron. 47 Omega children dead. Your pack's spiritual balance shattered. Half your alphas question your judgment for choosing an Omega as Luna. And Dominic—" Her smile was vicious. "Dominic knows you're vulnerable. I sent word before your trial. Bloodfang is coming, and Shadowpine is too broken to stop them." The words hit like physical blows. She was right. The pack was fractured, weakened, unprepared for war, and war was coming. "You destroyed us even in defeat," Theron said. "I told you I was practical." Cassia's eyes glittered in the torchlight. "Even if I die, Bloodfang wins. They'll crush you, Take your territory and eliminate every last Omega in the process. Everything I wanted accomplished, just without me alive to see it." She laughed again. "So yes, I'm laughing, because I won." Theron turned away, his stomach churning. Vera's hand found his, her fingers threading through his own. The simple touch steadied him. "She wants you to believe that," Vera said softly. "She wants you to think it's hopeless. Isn't it?" The words came out harsher than he intended. "Look at what she's done. The pack is divided. Half of them think I've gone mad. The other half don't trust you because you're Omega. And Bloodfang has an army while we have... what? Grief? Good intentions?" Vera was quiet for a moment. Then she pulled him to face her, her dark eyes fierce with something he couldn't name. "We have what Cassia never understood," she said. "We have every member of this pack. Not just alphas and betas. Everyone." She took a breath. "Let me help. Let the Omegas help. Vera, listen to me." Her voice was urgent now. "Omegas have gifts that alphas ignore because they're not about strength or dominance. We're empaths. We can feel deceit and loyalty. We're healers. We can strengthen your warriors and keep them fighting longer. We're connected to each other in ways that could create communication networks across the entire territory." She squeezed his hands. "Cassia tried to eliminate us because she thought we were weak, but she was wrong. We're not the pack's weakness. We're its foundation." Behind them, Cassia's laughter had stopped. When Theron glanced back, she was staring at Vera with something that looked almost like fear. "You're suggesting I put Omegas in positions of power," Theron said. "During a crisis, when half the pack already thinks I've lost my mind." "Yes," Vera didn't flinch. "I'm suggesting you trust your people, all of them." It was insane, revolutionary. Every instinct trained into him since childhood screamed that Omegas were to be protected, not elevated. That strength came from alpha dominance, not Omega inclusion. But those instincts had let 47 children die while he'd celebrated in ignorant bliss. "If I do this," he said slowly, "if I make you Luna Queen, there will be rebellion. Alphas will challenge us. Some will leave the pack entirely." "I know," Vera's voice was steady, "but the ones who stay will be choosing unity over tradition, and that's the pack worth fighting for." From her cell, Cassia made a sound of disgust. "You're both fools. This will destroy you faster than Dominic ever could." Theron looked at his false mate one last time, seeing not the woman he'd loved, but the enemy operative who'd played him perfectly for 8 years. Then he looked at Vera, small, fierce, unbreakable, and felt the true mate bond pulse with certainty. "Then we'll be fools together," he said. The announcement came at sunset, on the steps of the great hall where the entire pack had been summoned. Theron stood in his full ceremonial armor, the Shadowpine crown on his head, and Vera beside him in a simple blue dress that marked her clearly as Omega. The courtyard was packed, alphas in front, skepticism written on their faces, betas in the middle, uncertain, and Omegas at the edges, hardly daring to hope. "Shadowpine faces war," Theron's voice rang across the crowd. "Alpha Dominic of Bloodfang has declared his intention to invade, believing us weakened by recent events. He's not wrong. Queen Cassia's betrayal has left scars that will take years to heal." Murmurs of agreement, some angry, some fearful. But Cassia failed to understand something fundamental about strength. Theron placed his hand on Vera's shoulder. "True power doesn't come from eliminating those we consider weak. It comes from protecting them, from valuing every member of the pack, regardless of rank or status." The murmurs grew louder. Several alphas were shaking their heads. "Vera Ashwood is my true fated mate," Theron continued. "The bond that connected me to Cassia was artificial, dark magic designed to blind me to the truth. But the bond I share with Vera is real, unbreakable, chosen by fate itself." "She's Omega," someone shouted from the crowd. "Since when do Alpha Kings mate with Omegas?" Since always, Theron shot back. Fated mates don't follow our hierarchies. They follow the will of the moon herself. And the moon chose an Omega healer to stand beside me. To question that is to question fate itself. That gave the dissenters pause. No wolf, no matter how traditional, would openly defy the moon's will. I'm claiming Vera as my Luna Queen, Theron said, turning to face her fully. And I'm asking this pack to trust her leadership as you've trusted mine. He went to one knee before her, and the crowd gasped. An Alpha King kneeling before an Omega was unheard of. Will you stand with me? Theron asked, his voice softer now. Will you help me heal what was broken and build something stronger? Tears streaked down Vera's face. Yes, she whispered. Then louder, her voice carrying, yes. Theron rose and turned to address his pack. Luna Queen Vera has proposed that we elevate Omegas to active roles in our defense. They'll serve as empaths to identify spies and deceit, as healers to strengthen our warriors, as communication networks to coordinate our forces. He paused. Some of you will hate this. Some will leave. I won't stop you. But those who stay will be part of something unprecedented, a pack that values all its members equally. Silence stretched across the courtyard. Then, from the Omega section, a single voice rose in a howl of acceptance. Others joined, the sound building. Some betas added their voices. And finally, grudgingly, a few alphas. Not everyone, not even half. But enough. It was a start. Bloodfang attacked 3 weeks later, and they came with overwhelming force. 200 warriors, all alphas and betas, trained and vicious. They hit the southern border at dawn, expecting to find a fractured pack barely holding together. Instead, they found coordination. Vera had spent those 3 weeks organizing the Omegas into networks that spanned the entire territory. Every major position had Omega empaths who could sense emotional shifts and detect deception. The warriors who went into battle carried healing packs prepared by Omega hands, treatments that would keep them fighting through injuries that should have been crippling. And when Bloodfang tried to use spies to create chaos behind Shadowpine lines, they found themselves detected immediately. The Omega network felt the wrongness, the discordant notes in the pack's harmony, and reported threats before they could manifest. Theron led from the front, his massive silver wolf tearing through enemy lines. But he wasn't alone. Vera fought beside him, not with fangs and claws, but with something more powerful. She moved through the battlefield, touching wounded wolves, and golden light poured from her hands, healing injuries that should have been fatal. The surviving Omega children fought too, in their own way. They'd manifested gifts that Margaret said hadn't been seen in generations, pack-wide telepathy that let them coordinate movements instantly, protective shields that deflected attacks, and precognitive flashes that warned of ambushes before they happened. The children Cassia had tried to destroy were winning the war she'd started. Dominic finally emerged from his forces, his massive black wolf seeking out Theron with single-minded fury. They clashed in the center of the battlefield, 2 Alpha Kings fighting for supremacy. But Theron wasn't fighting alone. The mate bond surged with power, Vera's strength flowing into him even as she healed warriors 50 yards away. The Omega network held strong, their combined will supporting every Shadowpine wolf on the field. This was what Cassia had never understood. A pack wasn't strongest when it eliminated its weak members. It was strongest when every member fought for each other. Theron's jaws closed on Dominic's throat, and the Bloodfang Alpha went still. Surrender or death, the universal choice in wolf combat. Dominic shifted back to human form, his hands raised. I yield. The battle was over. In her cell, Cassia heard the victory howls, and finally broke. She'd been so certain, so sure that eliminating the Omegas would create a stronger pack. But the Omegas had saved Shadowpine. Their gifts, their coordination, their refusal to be invisible. It had turned the tide. Everything she'd believed was wrong. Everything she'd done was for nothing. When the guards came to escort her to her execution the next morning, she went quietly. There was nothing left to say. 6 months later, the Omega orphanage had been transformed. Where sick children had once died in overcrowded rooms, there was now the Pax Heart, a beautiful complex of buildings where Omega children were raised, educated, and trained in their gifts. No more hiding in shadows, no more pretending they didn't matter. They were treasured, protected, valued. Vera walked through the gardens with one hand resting on her swollen belly. She was 7 months pregnant with Theron's heir, and the entire pack had celebrated the news. Even the alphas who'd initially resisted her leadership had come around, won over by her competence and the undeniable strength she'd brought to Shadowpine. Children played in the gardens, their laughter bright as bells. They wore flower crowns and chased each other through the herbs, safe and healthy and loved. But there was one place Vera visited alone. The memorial garden stood at the edge of the complex, 54 stones arranged in a spiral. 47 for the Omega children who'd died, 7 for the Omega healers who'd been silenced over the years, and 1 stone, smaller than the others, engraved with a name that made Vera's heart break every time she read it. Finn Ashwood, beloved brother, gone too soon. He'd died 2 weeks after the trial, his small body finally giving up the fight. Vera had held him at the end, and he'd smiled at her, telling her she was going to be queen and she had to be brave. She knelt before his stone now, tears streaming down her face. "I'm trying," she whispered. "I'm trying to be brave enough for both of us." "You are." Theron's voice was soft behind her. She felt him kneel beside her, his hand finding hers. The mate bond hummed between them, solid and real and unbreakable. "I made you a promise," Vera said, her voice thick with grief. "Standing here, I promised that no Omega child would ever be considered worthless again, that we'd matter, that we'd be protected." "You've kept that promise," Theron said. "Look around you, love. Every child here is safe because of you." "But Finn would be proud." Theron pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her. "He'd be so proud of what you've built." Vera leaned into him, letting herself grieve and hope at the same time. The baby kicked inside her, strong, healthy, a sign of the future they were building together. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold, Theron lifted his head and howled. It was a song of remembrance, of grief, of all they'd lost. Vera joined him, her voice blending with his. And across Shadowpine, every wolf heard and added their voices. Alphas, betas, omegas, all of them howling together, a pack united not by hierarchy but by choice, by love, by the understanding that strength came from protecting all their members, not just the powerful. The song rose into the evening sky, carrying their pain and their hope, their past and their future. And in that moment, standing beside her brother's grave with her mate's arms around her and their child growing strong inside her, Vera knew that Finn's death hadn't been meaningless. It had sparked a revolution. It had saved a kingdom. And it had proven once and for all that Omega lives mattered, not in spite of their gentleness and compassion, but because of it. The howling continued long into the night, a promise sung in wolf voices that echoed across the territory. Never again. Never forgotten. Never worthless. We are Shadowpine. And we are whole. Thank you for watching this video. Subscribe, like, and share this video to continue listening to this type of story daily, and also to appreciate this community too. I would like to hear your wonderful opinion about this story. Please comment below.